Massive multiverse-shattering events are commonplace throughout comic books, and now that superheroes have become the dominant icons in pop culture, this kind of storytelling has seeped its way into movies and shows that aren't just comic book adaptations. And while characters have certainly hopped universes before, there is one comic event that went bigger than anything before it. Of course, I am talking about the legendary Crisis on Infinite Earths. This book was the first of DC's 2 reboots, and it permanently changed all of pop culture. And today we're taking a deep dive into the lore, the creative chaos going on behind the scenes, and the lasting impact of this monumental story. Hello and welcome to Comic Drake, where I talk about comic books and my name is Drake. Let's talk about it. One of the most iconic covers in all of comic history is Crisis number 7, and I happen to have a graded copy that's signed by George Perez, which I'm going to be giving away to one of you guys through today's sponsor, Whatnot. It's a platform that's kind of like if eBay and Twitch combined, where streamers host live auctions that sell things like comic books, trading cards, and so much more. I've actually been looking to downscale my comic collection for a good while, so I'm going to be auctioning off a bunch of my books, and of course, giving this away with no purchase necessary. So thanks again to Whatnot for sponsoring today's video, and hopefully, I'll see you there. Back in the 70s, a young comic fan named Marv Wolfman had a great idea for a storyline. There would be a villain named the Librarian that sits in an orbiting space and spy on the superheroes, and he would take that information and sell it to the villains. When the heroes found out, they would have to team up and take down the Librarian, and a crossover at a scale that the comic industry had never seen before. When Wolfman finally became a writer, he continuously pitched the idea to Marvel and DC whenever he started a new book, but consistently, the publishers shot down the idea. Fast forward to 1981, where Marv was writing the Green Lantern series, and in a recent issue, Hal Jordan seemingly met another character for the first time, but a fan wrote in with an actually, and pointed out that they had actually met in a prior issue. Whenever Marvel got one of these pedantic claims, they sent out a special reward called a no prize. Meanwhile, DC Comics just had their writers respond graciously to these kinds of letters. Now, Marv was polite to the reader, but he was still frustrated that DC let this happen in the first place. Since the company had been publishing comics for decades from hundreds of writers, many of which weren't originally meant to be a part of the same universe, the company's continuity was a mess, and it was hard to catch all these inconsistencies. It also didn't help that their main competitor, Marvel, was a significantly younger company and had a tight and consistent vision for their universe that was helmed by either Stan Lee or his protege Roy Thomas. Marv Wolfman knew that this was finally his chance to declutter DC's continuity and streamline it so that it would actually make sense and be less intimidating to new readers. He called this project History of the DC Universe, and it would do just that, tell a structured version of the history of the DC Universe from the caveman days to the hypothetical future. However, the higher-ups at DC thought this idea was neat, but they wanted Wolfman to think bigger. This was a huge opportunity to shake things up, and with that, the seeds of Crisis on Infinite Earths began to sprout. Wolfman took the permission to take a hatchet to the DC multiverse and ran with it. But if they were going to do things right, DC needed a continuity expert, so they hired a fan named Peter Sanderson to sit in the company library for 2 years straight and read every comic book they had ever published and take extensive notes on all of them. And let me tell you, that might sound like a dream job, but as someone who does that for a living, reading comics for 8 hours a day, it can get mind-numbing, especially if the books are bad and you're not allowed to skip them. For the art, Marv hired his right-hand man from their legendary Teen Titans comic, George Perez, who suggested that the title of the event should be changed to DC Universe Crisis as an homage to those classic multiverse crossover stories, Crisis on Earth 1, Crisis on Earth 2, etc. From there, it expanded into an absurdly long title before finally shrinking down to what we know it as today. Crisis on Infinite Earths was originally set to release in 1983, but when Wolfman realized that DC's 50th anniversary was just 2 years away, they decided to save it as a huge event, complete with a brand new company logo. I mean, after all, what's a better way to celebrate the DC multiverse than to destroy the whole damn thing? But this gave DC plenty of time to tease the event, with Marv and George unveiling a reworked version of the Librarian in their Teen Titans book called The Monitor, and in the background they developed his negative counterpart, the Anti-Monitor. Originally, Anti-Monitor was just a placeholder name that they had until they could come up with something better, but they didn't. Other writers were also encouraged to work the Monitor into all of their books as well to tease what was to come, and that combined with DC constantly dropping hints at conventions and in letter pages about something big being right around the corner, fans were excited, but nothing could have prepared them for this.
In the beginning, there was only one, a single black infinitude, so cold and dark for so very long that even the burning light was imperceptible. But the light grew and the infinitude shuddered, and the darkness finally screamed, as much in pain as in relief. For in that instant, a multiverse was born. A multiverse of worlds vibrating and replicating, and a multiverse that should have been one became many.
Once upon a time, a brilliant scientist named Krona became obsessed with seeing the origin of all creation, and he built a machine that allowed him to do just that. And what he saw was a hand spinning the fabric of reality itself. However, the mere act of observing this event caused a big bang, which erupted creation into the multiverse. Simultaneously, a dark analog of it came into existence as well, called the antimatter universe. Furthermore, two powerful entities arose, the monitor of the multiverse and the anti-monitor of the antimatter universe. The two brothers fought for 1,000,000 years, and because they were equal in strength, the two were eventually rendered unconscious at the exact same time. The brothers remained dormant for another 9,000,000 years, until a scientist named Kelmosa similarly created a machine to observe the origins of the multiverse, resulting in an explosion that woke the anti-monitor and tore a hole into the antimatter universe. The positive matter of Mosa's universe was eaten away by the antimatter, and as his domain expanded, the anti-monitor grew stronger. Realizing that he could become the most powerful entity in all of existence, the anti-monitor began moving from universe to universe, destroying everything in his path to further expand the reach of his antimatter universe. To make things even worse, each time that a universe fell, the destruction of the infinite Earths went faster and faster. At the exact same time, the Monitor woke as well, and he saw Kelmosa drifting in the void and enlisted him as an agent in his multiversal war. From now on, Mosa would become a pariah, cursed to teleport from dying universe to dying universe, witnessing their destruction and alerting the Monitor to the Anti-Monitor's whereabouts. To show just how powerful the Anti-Monitor was, Crisis opened up with the destruction of the inverted universe, Earth 3, which left the impression on readers that since the Crime Syndicate was just as powerful as the Justice League, then what chance could the heroes that we know and love have at stopping the antimatter wave? Before total annihilation, Alexander Luthor, the sole hero of Earth 3, put his son Alexander Jr. into an interdimensional rocket which allowed him to escape the destruction of his home universe, as a parallel to the classic Superman story. This little baby rocket was intercepted by the Monitor, but put a pin in that for later. After observing the multiverse for months and crunching the numbers, the Monitor sent his protege, Harbinger, to assemble a very specific group of heroes and villains from throughout the multiverse to fight off the antimatter waves. Now, you would think that she would assemble a powerhouse team of like 100 Supermen, but instead, it's like Harbinger drew names out of a hat, which results in a weird assortment of characters, like Psycho Pirate, Dawnstar, Simon, Blue Beetle, Solivar, and so on. Oh wait, nope, there's a Superman. Since a large part of this event was to incorporate characters from dead comic companies that DC had gobbled up into their main continuity, this high-profile event was an opportunity for DC to say, hey, check out all the IP we have, and hopefully get the readers interested in these more obscure superheroes. But man, Crisis is without a doubt one of, if not the most ambitious crossover in all of comic history. Everyone gets to pop up in this series, from Batman to Superman's psychic mermaid ex-girlfriend. But anyway, the grab bag group are suddenly attacked by the Anti-Monitor's shadow demons, but after being teased for months, they're scared off by the Monitor's grand reveal. By this time, the looming threat of the antimatter wave made its way to Earth 1, being heralded with the skies turning red. The red skies showed up in every DC comic at the time, but to be honest, that's the extent that the majority of the core books tied into the actual plot of Crisis. The heroes just kind of went, that's weird. At this point in time, over 100,000 universes were already wiped out, so the Monitor erected devices throughout history that could prevent the antimatter wave's advancement, and he assigned his eclectic entourage to defend them from the shadow demons. Unfortunately though, while defending the devices, the emotion-manipulating Psycho Pirate was brought over to the Anti-Monitor's side, and Harbinger was corrupted. Desperately in need of new champions, the Monitor turns a Japanese woman named Dr. Hoshi into a new and absurdly powerful version of Dr. Light. What's also interesting is that when Wildcat is hurt in combat, his goddaughter, Yolanda Montes, takes up the mantle. Could you imagine the outrage from internet dude bros if these characters, who were traditionally white dudes, were suddenly replaced by women of color if this happened in 2023 and not in 1985? Despite the power of Dr. Light, Harbinger was still able to kill the Monitor. However, this was just according to his Keikaku, since the Monitor saw this coming from a mile away, and his death released all of his energy, which activated the mystery devices. This created a pocket dimension that absorbed Earths 1 and 2, but while this kept them out of the Anti-Monitor's reach, the two universes began to merge, threatening to destroy them both when the process completed. Natural disasters began popping up all across the planets, but to make things worse, Psycho Pirate's emotion manipulation abilities were enhanced by the Anti-Monitor, and he caused all of the heroes and villains to fight amongst themselves. Snapping out from the Anti-Monitor's control, Harbinger used the last of her power to bring Earths 4, S, and X into the Pocket Dimension, where they also began to merge with Earths 1 and 2. Okay, so I know that I just spat out a bunch of words rapid fire, so here's a quick rundown to make sure that everyone is on the same page. At this point, every universe in the multiverse had been destroyed except for the 5 inside the Pocket Dimension. Earth 1 is the mainstream DC universe, Earth 2 is the Golden Age, Earth 4 is Charlton Comics, Earth S is the classic Captain Marvel comics, and Earth X is Quality Comics. Got all that? Great. Now it's time to take that pen that we put in Baby Luther, because when he was drifting in his escape rocket, his body became charged with antimatter, which made him a unique blend of both it and positive matter. It also caused him to hyper-age and gain the ability to use his body as an interdimensional portal, because comics, and he uses it to bring all of the heroes into the antimatter universe so they can finally take on the Anti-Monitor himself. Superman gets his ass royally handed to him during the fight, but then Supergirl swoops in to save her baby cousin. And although she was able to deal enough damage to crack the Anti-Monitor's outer shell, she was killed in the process, leading to one of the most iconic covers in all of comic history. This was a high-profile death, but even though Supergirl was a well-known character, her books hadn't been selling that great at the time. But more importantly, DC planned to get rid of every Kryptonian other than Superman because the company thought that devalued him as the last son of Krypton. In fact, when Crisis was being planned out, Marv and the gang created a death list of every character that they were allowed to kill off. And when they went to the higher-ups with the list, they said, sure, and while you're at it, here are some more folks you can kill off. Basically, if your name is written in their notebook, you're dead. Huh, that sounds familiar. Supergirl's sacrifice allowed for the heroes to retreat, but while he was licking his wounds, the Anti-Monitor had his cronies build a massive antimatter cannon, which he could use to destroy the 5 merging universes in one fell swoop. Now, some of you might have noticed that despite there being a bunch of superheroes involved in all of these fights, the Flash is nowhere to be seen. Well, throughout the beginning of the series, Barry kept popping up to warn folks about the incoming destruction, but he would quickly rot into nothingness every single time. He ended up being taken prisoner in the antimatter universe, but was luckily able to break free and make his way towards the cannon. Barry runs and runs and runs, going at speeds thought to be impossible. This created a vortex that ripped the cannon to shreds, but in the end, Barry disintegrated once again. And this time, he wasn't coming back. Now this was an unexpected death. Marv Wolfman didn't even want to kill off Barry Allen, not just because he was a fan favorite, but because his creation marked the beginning of the Silver Age of comics. But the Flash was on the death list and DC insisted that he go. Funnily enough, one of the reasons why Barry kept appearing and disappearing for the first few issues was because Wolfman kept trying to convince DC to let him live. It was argued that instead of dying, Barry could simply lose his speed. But that was struck down specifically to prevent a lazy writer from coming sometime in the future and just giving him his speed back. With his antimatter cannon in pieces, the Anti-Monitor turned to Plan C and absorbed the antimatter of over 1 million universes into himself. Back in the remaining universes, the red skies vanished, and the crisis somehow seemed to be over, leading to the world kind of just coexisting with each other. Taking advantage of the chaos, Brainiac and Lex Luthor recruited dozens and dozens of villains to rule over the 5 Earths. Of course, the heroes intervened, but then the Spectre, the embodiment of God's vengeance, awoke and was like, guys, stop. The Anti-Monitor is still out here, we don't have time for this. What had happened is that the Anti-Monitor had gone back to the beginning of time so that his would be the hand of creation, preventing the multiverse from existing altogether. So once again, the heroes assemble to fight the Anti-Monitor, but this time, Superboy Prime is here. He's a kid from our actual real-life universe that got superpowers, and later in DC's history, he becomes one of the most powerful characters in existence. What's wild though is that he had literally just been created a couple months ago in a random Crisis tie-in. With Prime now in tow, the heroes travel to the dawn of time, only to discover that the Anti-Monitor was waiting for them. See, he had used all of his powers to get there in the first place, and if he was going to become the hand of creation, then he needed to absorb their life forces. The powerhouse heroes still try to do their best to take the Anti-Monitor down, but you've also got Batman and Robin chilling on the sidelines to give them their hope and courage. Remember, this was the 80s. It was way before Bruce became so overpowered that he could take down a god with nothing but a paperclip and a bar of soap. But in spite of all this hope and courage, the heroes fell, and the Anti-Monitor took his place as the hand of creation. But then suddenly, the Spectre shows up, beefed up with the combined might of the most powerful sorcerers in the multiverse, and he challenges the Anti-Monitor to the most high-stakes arm wrestling match of all time. Meanwhile, the villains are sent back 10 billion years to try and prevent Krona from witnessing creation, so that if the heroes failed, then there wouldn't be a big bang for the Anti-Monitor to exploit. But of course, they dropped the ball, and when Krona saw the two hands wrestling, a new origin story exploded from the void.
In the beginning, there were many. A multiversal infinitude, so cold and dark for so very long that even the burning light was imperceptible. But then the light grew, and the multiverse shuddered, and the darkness screamed as much in pain as in relief. For in that instant, a universe was born. A universe with mighty worlds orbiting burning suns. A universe reborn at the dawn of time. What had been many became one.
The remaining 5 universes had fully merged into one new Earth, and almost every character's history was fully integrated into this new reality. Although there were a few stragglers, like the Earth 2 versions of Superman, Huntress, Wonder Woman, and Robin, who all somehow weren't a part of this new universe's history, which essentially left them stranded. The only folks that remembered the existence of the multiverse and the crisis that ended it were those that fought the Anti-Monitor at the dawn of time. And seeking to understand what happened, the Supermen, Wally West, and Jay Garrick all traveled to the edge of reality, only to find nothing but a black expanse. The multiverse no longer existed. Earth 2 Superman absolutely loses it when he realizes that his Lois Lane had never existed, but there isn't any time to process those emotions because the Anti-Monitor is still a threat somehow.
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
So once again, the heroes have to have yet another final fight with him and the Shadow Demons, and the bad guys are defeated, again, with the new Dr. Light delivering the final blow by absorbing the power of a star and unleashing it in a mighty blast. But wait, he isn't dead, shy a surprise. The Anti-Monitor absorbs his Shadow Demons back into his body and fires his laser, instantly killing Earth 2 Wonder Woman. Alexander Luthor readies another body portal, and Earth 2 Superman and Superboy Prime volunteer to sacrifice themselves so that the rest of the heroes could get away. Now, during this whole fight, Darkseid was somehow able to hack into Luthor's eyes to watch the battle like it's a pay-per-view boxing match, and he's also able to use said eyes to use them as a portal to fire off an energy beam to finally take down the Anti-Monitor again. When the dust settled, Alexander reveals that he could no longer use his powers to teleport the 3 of them back to New Earth, which is then made even more complicated when the Anti-Monitor comes back again. Can't anything stop him? His body's destroyed and he still comes back. Yeah, you telling me, Clark? Earth 2 Superman yells what we've all been thinking, and at long last, he finally takes out the Anti-Monitor with one big final punch. And you know that he's actually dead for real this time because the antimatter universe began to crumble all around them. Luthor is like, yeah, so as I was saying, I can't take us back to New Earth, but we can go to this cool paradise dimension that I found instead. And Superman says, thanks, but without my wife, I'd rather just stay here and die with the antimatter universe. To which Luthor replies, oh yeah, I actually saved your wife off screen, and so the 4 of us, we can all go together, and they do that. This was meant to be a way to give the Superman that launched the DC universe and who was responsible for the company being what it is today a happy ending, which, that's a strange happy ending. Though a good one, though, is that turns out Earth 2 Wonder Woman never died. Instead, she was deemed worthy of Zeus of joining the Greek gods on Olympus. And also, Wally West took over as the new Flash, which blazes a trail into a new era. At long last, things settled into normalcy, and outside of a few deaths, it's basically like the crisis had never happened. Well, that is except for Psycho Pirate, who was locked in an asylum and assumed to be babbling nonsense. But in fact, he remembers everything, so you don't have to. The idea to have Crisis be remembered or not was a contentious topic. Wolfman argued that nobody should remember its existence because that could create a domino effect that would put DC back in the complicated continuity that necessitated the book in the first place. However, the editor said, if the heroes don't remember the Crisis, then it invalidates the book, to which Mark replied, and I quote,
"The heroes don't buy our comics. It doesn't matter if they remember the stories. The readers do and they'll remember them. Let's not complicate things."
However, Marv was outvoted, so the ending was rewritten so that the heroes that fought at the dawn of time would retain their memories, which kind of invalidates the interesting thing about Psycho Pirate being the only one that remembers. Thankfully though, that was then played with in Grant Morrison's run on Animal Man, so that's forgiven.
Did Crisis work as a story? Yep. Did it neaten up our universe? You bet. Did it give DC Comics a launchpad to the future? Of course. Did we take advantage of all the opportunities presented by the dramatic conclusion of the landmark series called Crisis on Infinite Earths? Well, yes and no.
The original idea was to have every single comic start over at number 1 to make things easier for fans that wanted to jump into the post-Crisis era, but DC had to pull a DC and not do that. According to an interview with Wolfman, folks thought that readers wouldn't want to pick up a number 1 issue because that would mean the series hadn't proven itself to be good enough to keep going yet, whereas a comic that is well into its hundreds, well, it must be that good if it lasted so long. As for the quality of the post-Crisis comics though, it was a bit of a mixed bag. See, there were some damn good books like Batman Year One and Man of Steel, which gave us the updated origin stories for these characters, and the new Wonder Woman and Justice League series were phenomenal. Plus, the first new hero of any significance to be introduced in the post-Crisis continuity was Booster Gold, and y'all know he's my absolute favorite. As for the bad stuff though, characters like Power Girl, Wonder Girl, and the Legion of Superheroes were completely mishandled. And don't even get me started on Hawkman. Like, that shit got so complicated that I nearly ripped out my hair when I was writing my award-winning video all about it. But still, Crisis on Infinite Earths was a sales juggernaut, and plenty of new readers hopped on, despite the occasional hiccup. And remember the original title of the event, History of the DC Universe? Well, the concept got reworked and was originally going to be the final 2 issues of Crisis, but they instead released it as a follow-up, chronicling the history and timeline of New Earth. Years later, Marv returned to Crisis by writing a novelization of the story, but from the Flash's perspective, and he was even called upon to write a new story that took place between issues 4 and 5. But by far, the book's biggest legacy is that DC used the success of Crisis on Infinite Earths to make so many more Crises afterwards to make little tweaks and adjustments to their canon, with the main sequels to it being Infinite Crisis, where the folks that went off to the Paradise Dimension broke free, and Dark Crisis, which literally retitles itself halfway through the event to Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths. I am never calling it that, nobody is ever calling it that. I'd also be remiss to not talk about the Arrowverse doing its own version of the iconic event, and actually handling it pretty well to boot. I especially love the Marv cameo at the end where he gets to talk to both Flash and Supergirl. You know, the 2 biggest characters that were killed off during his book. After rereading Crisis for this video, I can totally admit that it's not necessarily the best story by modern standards. The pacing can sometimes be either too slow or too fast. The whole bit about the villains taking over the 5 Earths is a really unnecessary detour, and some of the interactions are just plain weird, like when Firehawk is showing off a new costume that she made in the middle of saving people from a burning building. Martian Manhunter's about to die, dude! However, it's impossible to deny that this is one of the most important comics ever written, and you have to at least respect the sheer scope of the plot. Plus, that George Perez art? Crisis on Infinite Earths is the standard by which every following Crisis is judged, and I'm going to be covering every single one of them in this playlist, so if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you know when the next one drops. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned at least a little something new, and hopefully, I'll see you next time.